The dining room glowed with candlelight and silverware, but beneath the surface warmth, Evelyn Blake was quietly counting every lie spoken across the table. Turkey, golden and steaming, took center stage on the mahogany table. Crystal goblets sparkled with Merlot. Evelyn reached for the carving knife with graceful precision, her burgundy dress catching the glow from the chandelier overhead. Across from her, Derek gestured animatedly with his wineglass, recounting his recent investment win for the third time that evening. His voice rose just slightly above the soft jazz playing from the antique console radio, tuned to the holiday station out of Harrisburg. "He doubled our money in a week." Ruth Blake beamed with pride, her voice smooth from years of managing dinner conversations, like a courtroom drama. "Such instinct, like his father." Evelyn offered a practiced smile, slicing into the turkey. Her hand moved steadily while her mind cataloged lie number 14. Colleen dabbed her napkin. "Evelyn, I hope you didn't stress too much over this dinner. I know you've been busy." The pause was loaded. "I still remember when you could barely boil water. Bless your heart." Evelyn placed a slice of white meat on Ruth's plate, then Colleen's. "Time teaches us all, doesn't it?" she said gently. Ruth didn't hear her or didn't care to respond. The cranberry sauce shimmered in its silver dish. Derek raised his glass again. "Let's toast," he announced, already mid-sentence. "To another year of success. It's been a big one for us, especially at the firm." Evelyn caught Naomi's eyes across the table. The young assistant sat beside Colleen, silent and attentive. A flick of the wrist, nothing more, told Evelyn that she was watching, noting, prepared. Evelyn shifted slightly in her chair, the silk of her dress brushing against the high back cushion. "I suppose that little promotion of yours was a nice surprise," Ruth said, reaching for the gravy boat, "though Derek tells us it's mostly a title." Evelyn poured water into glasses. "I like the work." "Of course, dear," Colleen added, leaning closer. "And isn't it lucky that Derek manages the finances? Gives you more time for dinners like this." Lie number 22. The conversation swirled like the snow outside the dining room windows, pretty, cold, and always moving. Derek launched into another story, this one about a lunch meeting with potential foreign investors. Evelyn noted how he omitted Naomi's presence, how he exaggerated the deal's value. He had always been more interested in optics than outcomes. Ruth sampled the mashed potatoes and grimaced faintly. "Bit too much cream this time." "I'll adjust the recipe," Evelyn said, folding her hands in her lap. She had already made it Ruth's preferred way. Naomi stood to help clear the salad plates. As she passed Evelyn, she leaned just enough for a whisper. "Louise confirmed." Evelyn nodded without turning. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from Louise lit the screen. "Footage confirmed. Clean angle, time-stamped." Marvin entered briefly to refresh the wine. Ruth gestured for more. "You always set such a lovely table," she told Evelyn with the tone one uses for a well-trained pet. "It's the same set my grandmother used," Evelyn said, setting down the carving fork. "She believed hospitality was its own form of strength." "Strange strength," Colleen murmured, lifting her glass. "Still, the roast is quite nice this year." The plates emptied. The pie was served. Derek took full credit for finding the bakery that made it, though Evelyn had baked it herself that morning, before the house had even stirred. She listened to his embellishments, watching the way his mother nodded, how Colleen laughed on cue. As the evening drew toward its end, the fire popped softly in the hearth. Ruth leaned back in her chair. "You do try, Evelyn, and that counts, even if business isn't your strong suit." Evelyn poured herself a final half glass of wine, the bottle almost empty. "I suppose time will show us what counts." Derek stood and raised his glass once more. "To a holiday full of revelations." "To a holiday full of revelations," Evelyn echoed, letting the words settle across the table like the snow against the windows. Her phone buzzed again. A second text arrives. "Naomi, boardroom reserved, documents secured, 9 a.m., December 26th. Evelyn slips her phone back into her pocket. Long after the candles were blown out and the guests had left, Evelyn remained in her study, surrounded by the truth no one saw coming. The room was quiet except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, blanketing the neighborhood in stillness. Evelyn sat at her desk, a thick file open before her, pages fanned out like a surgeon's tools. Precise, clinical, undeniable. She wore a navy cashmere robe, sleeves pushed up, her reading glasses low on her nose. A half-empty mug of chamomile tea rested beside a leather-bound notebook, the steam long gone cold. On the screen in front of her, rows of numbers danced under the glow of her monitor, movement in accounts, transfers at odd hours, names that didn't belong. She reached for a red pen and circled a transaction from mid-October. Derek had labeled it a vendor deposit. It was anything but. She clicked the adjacent video file and Derek appeared on screen, caught in a grainy frame entering the private server room. Unauthorized. After hours. Evelyn leaned back, letting the chair creak. The fire's glow danced across her framed diplomas, one of them from Wharton, earned while Derek had dismissed her night classes as a cute little hobby. She reached for a yellow post-it, scribbled a note, and stuck it atop a printed report. Include in summary for Wallace. Her phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. Evelyn clicked to open the video call. Naomi appeared in a modest apartment kitchen, earbuds in, a warm light casting soft shadows on her face. "You're still up." "Hard to sleep when your future hinges on a boardroom's air conditioning," Evelyn said with a slight smile. Naomi smiled back. "Lewis confirmed the server room entries. We have all 3 camera angles, time-stamped, synced, clean." Evelyn nodded once. "And the shell companies?" 3 fully traced, 2 registered under aliases linked to Derek. "I'm feeding it all into the final report." Evelyn rubbed her temple gently. He was planning to siphon and vanish. Jessica in tow, maybe. Or another assistant. He always assumed no one noticed. "I've noticed," Naomi said, her voice quiet but steady. There was a pause. In the background, Evelyn could hear the soft rumble of a heater kicking on. She thought of the snow piling up outside and of how cold it would be in that boardroom Monday morning. Clean, sharp, no warmth needed. "You okay?" Naomi asked. Evelyn glanced down at the old photo on her desk, her on the first day as CEO, standing beside the firm's founder, both smiling stiffly. She straightened the frame. "I've been preparing for this longer than he's been lying." As the call ended, Evelyn closed the laptop slowly and reached for a different folder marked Luis Alvarez, Security. Inside was a thank you card he'd written years ago, unsigned. "Just a note, you didn't have to, but you did. My son is still here, thank you." She remembered the night she learned of Luis's situation, his boy's leukemia diagnosis, the impossible cost of treatment. She hadn't said a word. She simply instructed HR to reroute the hardship fund, then deleted the transaction trail herself. Now Luis had repaid her with something far greater: silence, vigilance, loyalty. Evelyn reached into a lower drawer and withdrew a second file, this one stamped Private Equity Cayman. Derek had been preparing a clean break, money moved, tickets reserved. Jessica's name had appeared on a few dinner reservations in New York, others in Miami. Evelyn had the receipts. She always did. Marvin's voice floated in from the hallway. "Lights off in the West Wing, ma'am." "Leave them on tonight," she called back. "Just in case I need more tea." She clicked open the final draft of the presentation slides Naomi had assembled. They were clean, damning, just enough for the board to act, not too much to overwhelm. She would let the documentation speak. Another message came in, this one from the firm's audit liaison. Report finalized. All discrepancies reconciled, ready for distribution. Evelyn highlighted the message, saved the attachment, and set it into her folder labeled Board Meeting, Final. Her fingers hovered over the class before she shut it. The fire crackled, echoing softly into the corners of the room. Her phone vibrated again. A new message lit the screen. She receives a final email from Derek. "Excited to make my promotion official." Evelyn closes her laptop with a soft smirk. On December 26th, Derek walked into Blake and Company with a confident stride and a rehearsed speech, unaware he was stepping onto a stage built for his downfall. The lobby smelled faintly of cinnamon and floor polish, the usual Christmas wreaths still hanging above the elevators, though their bows had begun to droop. Derek straightened his tie in the mirrored panel as the elevator doors opened. He winked at his reflection, then stepped inside. "Morning, sir," said Nancy at the front desk, offering a polite nod. She kept her tone neutral. Derek returned it with a smirk. "Big day." He passed Marvin in the hallway. Marvin, always early, always precise. The house manager turned logistics coordinator gave a small nod and handed Derek a takeaway cup. "Double shot today. Big day ahead, huh?" Marvin said, voice level. Derek chuckled, accepting the coffee, like a champion preparing for a victory lap. "You know it." The conference floor was quiet, almost reverent. Most of the holiday decor had been cleared away, but a few poinsettia pots remained near the windows, their red leaves vibrant against the snow-blanketed skyline. Derek admired the view from the corridor. This would be his view soon, he thought, once the title caught up with the reality he'd been living. At the end of the hall, Naomi stood beside the boardroom entrance, tablet in hand, lips pressed into a neutral line. She wore a charcoal suit that fit her like armor, her hair pulled back neatly. "You look sharp today," Derek said, giving her the once-over. "So do you," Naomi replied. "Everyone's inside." He stepped into the room with theatrical poise. The boardroom stretched before him. Long walnut table, high-backed chairs, coffee carafes untouched. Sunlight filtered through the frosted windows. The air was still, like a lake before a storm. Board members sat in their usual positions. Mr. Wallace gave a brief nod. Mrs. Chen didn't look up from her folder. Mr. Drew tapped a pen against his legal pad, without rhythm. Derek moved toward the center chair, the one he assumed would soon be his. "Good morning, everyone," he began, loosening his collar just enough to seem relaxed. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank you all for trusting me with this next chapter of leadership. It's been an honor serving under the executive team, and—" He stopped mid-sentence as the door opened again. Evelyn entered quietly, dressed in slate gray, the heels of her shoes making no more sound than the snow outside. She walked to the head of the table without acknowledging Derek's presence. "Mrs. Blake," Mr. Wallace said, straightening, "we weren't expecting—" "I called this meeting," Evelyn said, placing a slim leather folder in front of her. "There are matters we need to address before any new appointments are discussed." Derek blinked. "Sorry, what?" "I was told this meeting was to finalize—" "You may want to sit down, Derek," Evelyn said calmly. Her voice wasn't cold. It was settled, like dust after a storm. Naomi began distributing folders to the board members. One by one, they opened them, eyes scanning lines, flipping pages, brows furrowing. "What's going on?" Derek asked, his tone sharpening. "What is this?" Evelyn didn't look at him. "These are records of unauthorized transfers totaling nearly $1.4 million over a 12-month period, initiated by you, hidden in layers of shell companies registered offshore." "That's ridiculous," Derek said, his voice rising. This isn't— "There's more," Naomi interjected, flipping open her tablet. "Access logs to restricted data servers, surveillance timestamps, a full audit trail." Mr. Drew adjusted his glasses. "It's thorough, alarmingly thorough." Mrs. Chen looked at Derek with a mix of disappointment and something else, curiosity perhaps. "How long did you think you could keep this from us?" Derek turned to Evelyn. "You set this up." Evelyn met his gaze. "I protected this firm. You mistook silence for ignorance." He sputtered. "You can't just— I mean, we're married." A quiet fell over the room again, the kind that announces something has ended. Marvin appeared at the door, nodding to Naomi. She tapped her tablet twice. A soft chime sounded. Security enter silently. Derek turns pale. Evelyn adds, "And no, Derek. You were never promoted. You were investigated." When Derek opened the folder marked confidential, his smirk dissolved into disbelief. His entire house of cards lay exposed in black and white. He scanned the first page, then another, his eyes darting over numbers, names, transaction logs. By the time he reached the email excerpts, his own words lifted from private correspondence. His hands had begun to tremble. He looked up at the board members, expecting confusion, sympathy, or at least hesitation. What he saw was calm, preparedness. "This is a mistake," he said, voice tighter now. I, I've never seen half of these transfers." Naomi stepped forward, her expression professional. She adjusted her tablet and cast the screen to the monitor at the end of the boardroom. The projector clicked on, illuminating the room with a precise graph. "Each line represents a transfer from one of the firm's internal escrow accounts," she said evenly, "all signed under Derek Blake's access credentials, cross-referenced with security footage from our server rooms." "Security footage," Derek repeated, the words catching. "Yes," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "We take data breaches seriously, especially when they involve someone with unfettered access." The board murmured, low voices hushed shock, but not surprise. Naomi advanced the slides. The screen showed Derek entering a restricted room on 3 separate occasions, always alone, always outside regular hours. Time-stamped, clear. "Who even gave you the right?" Derek began. Evelyn lifted her hand gently. "I did. As chief executive officer of this institution, I authorized an internal audit the moment irregularities began to surface." The word CEO landed like a gavel. It echoed through the room, undeniable. "You're not the CEO," Derek snapped, laughter on the edge of hysteria. You've been pretending." Evelyn slid a slim leather case across the table. Inside were her credentials, dated appointment papers, and the controlling interest certificate she had quietly held since her 3rd year with the company. "You were so certain I was still the secretary you married," she said softly. "You never thought to ask otherwise." Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair, sighing. "It's all here: shell companies, flat bookings, expense discrepancies." "Derek," Mrs. Chen added gently, "we wanted to believe in your potential. But you didn't just break trust, you monetized it." Derek's breathing quickened. "You people don't know the whole picture. You think she's innocent? You think—" Evelyn stood, calm, steady. "No one said I was innocent, but I've been transparent. Unlike you." She opened another folder and removed a manila envelope. She placed it in front of Derek. "These are divorce papers," she said, "citing financial misconduct, breach of marital trust, and emotional abandonment." The room went still. "You can't do this," Derek whispered. "You already did," Evelyn replied. A soft chime echoed from the wall speaker. Naomi tapped the screen again. A new window appeared, Luis Alvarez, in pre-recorded testimony. He sat in a security office, dressed plainly, hands folded on the desk. "Name's Luis Alvarez, 10-year employee, head of overnight security. I reviewed footage of Mr. Blake accessing confidential areas without proper clearance. I also flagged several entries under false scheduling codes. All have been archived and reported." The video ended. Silence followed. Mr. Drew turned to Evelyn. "Shall we proceed with the vote?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Each board member gave their response in turn, clear, firm, unanimous. Mrs. Chen closed her folder. "Mr. Blake, you are hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately." Security re-entered. One officer stood beside Derek's chair, the other near the doorway. "I built this place," Derek hissed, standing. "I brought in clients, deals, prestige." "You brought shadows," Evelyn said quietly. "We're clearing them out." He turned to leave, unsteady. As Derek exits, stunned, Evelyn's phone buzzes, a message from the press liaison. "Do we proceed with the release?" She types, "Yes." The next morning, Evelyn opened her front door to find a newspaper on her porch, her own face staring back beneath the headline, "CEO's Husband Exposed in Scandal." The paper had been folded neatly, just like always. She bent down slowly, the chill of the porch steps seeping through her slippers. There, beneath the bold black letters, was a photo of her from the boardroom. Composed, chin lifted, eyes steady. The caption read, "Evelyn Blake, quiet strength at Blake and Company." She held the paper in her hands for a moment before stepping back inside, shutting the door gently behind her. The house felt quieter than usual, not empty, just settled. In the kitchen, the coffee pot gurgled its last few drops. She poured herself a cup, added a splash of cream, and sat at the small round table by the window. Snow still dusted the backyard, and the bird bath her grandmother had gifted her years ago stood half buried beneath it. She unfolded the newspaper and skimmed the article. It was accurate, measured, no sensationalism. It told of the audit, the vote, the board's swift action, and then it spoke of her rise through the company, the trust she had earned, the silence she had kept. A knock at the door broke her focus. She opened it to find Marvin holding a cardboard box. Found this in Derek's office. Thought you might want to look through it before we store it. Thank you, she said, stepping aside to let him in. He placed the box on the hallway bench. We'll send someone to clean the office next week. She nodded. No rush. He hesitated. People are proud of you, ma'am. A lot of folks are talking. Good things. Quietly, but it's there. Quiet's enough, she said softly. After he left, Evelyn sat again, letting her gaze wander. The Christmas lights still glowed faintly on the porch railing outside, though the celebration had long passed. She made a mental note to take them down this weekend. Her phone rang. Ruth. Evelyn hesitated, then answered. Hello. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Ruth's voice, softer than Evelyn had ever heard it. I didn't know. Evelyn didn't say anything. I judged you, Ruth continued, voice catching. All these years, I assumed. You weren't alone, Evelyn said gently, but you were loudest. A sharp breath. You were patient with me. I don't know if I deserve that. Maybe not, Evelyn replied, not unkindly, but I learned to forgive a long time ago, for my own peace. Ruth whispered, I'm sorry, Evelyn. I believe you, Evelyn said, then let the silence end the call. She stood and walked to her study. On her desk sat the same envelope Luis had slipped under the door earlier that morning. Inside was a photo, his son, maybe 9 years old now, laughing in a field of sunflowers, full cheeks, eyes bright. There was a small note scribbled on the back. He's alive because someone didn't need credit to do the right thing. Thank you. Evelyn sat down, holding the photo carefully, as if the moment might break. She thought of the quiet kindnesses that built the strongest bridges, the ones without applause. She placed the photo in a silver frame and set it beside her grandmother's handkerchief on the shelf. Her phone buzzed again. She receives an email from the Women in Business Leadership Summit. Would you speak at our national event? The applause faded, but Evelyn's words lingered, not about revenge, but about being underestimated and rising anyway. The ballroom lights dimmed to a warm amber glow as the final notes of clapping settled into a respectful hush. Evelyn stood at the podium for a breath longer, her fingers resting lightly on its edge. She didn't rush. The silence was part of the message. Behind her, a maroon velvet curtain swayed slightly as the heating system kicked in. Outside, snow fell in gentle waves over the Philadelphia skyline, visible through the tall arched windows. Inside, 300 women, executives, entrepreneurs, retired educators, a few gray-haired trailblazers in thick-knit shawls, sat watching her with a stillness that said they had heard something that mattered. She offered a soft nod, stepped back from the microphone, and gave a quiet smile as she walked off the stage. The path backstage was lined with people she didn't know, but who knew her story now. Some touched her arm lightly. One woman mouthed, "Thank you." Another in her 70s reached out and pressed Evelyn's hand between both of hers, whispering, "You reminded me I'm still more than what they think." Naomi waited near the curtain, holding Evelyn's coat over her arm. "You could have dropped the mic, you know," she said with a grin. Evelyn shook her head gently. "Dignity is louder when it's quiet." They walked together through the backstage hallway, carpeted in deep blue, lined with framed photographs from past conferences. In one, a young black woman stood between two Supreme Court justices. In another, a grandmother and her granddaughter posed beside a plaque that read "First in her field." As they reached the dressing area, Naomi handed her a glass bottle of still water and a small linen napkin. Evelyn glanced down at the napkin and smiled. Embroidered in the corner was a single cursive E. Her grandmother used to do the same, always marking things, always preparing. "You did beautifully," Naomi said. "Luis was in the third row." Evelyn's gaze softened. I saw him. Louise had sat quietly, just like in the old break room years ago, hands clasped, shoulders steady, eyes full of something deeper than gratitude. Next to him was his wife, holding that same sunflower photo Evelyn now kept on her shelf. Evelyn took a slow breath. You know, she said, I once thought this kind of room wasn't for people like me. Naomi raised an eyebrow. And now, I realize, Evelyn said, it was always waiting. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Ruth. I was wrong. I'd be honored to try your pie this year. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. There was no punctuation, just words, honest ones. She typed a simple reply. You'll get the good crust this time. She slipped her phone back into her coat and turned toward the exit. The hallway beyond led to the car waiting outside. Marvin always timed things precisely. But before she reached the door, he stepped toward her, his coat buttoned, gloves in one hand. Message came for you, he said, offering a cream-colored envelope, thick and folded twice. Evelyn took it, opened it silently. Inside was a letterhead from a national investment board, an invitation to join as senior advisor, a new seat at a bigger table, a new path. She smiled, not with surprise, but with the calm understanding of someone who had already earned it long ago. She walks off stage. Marvin hands her a folded letter, job offer for board seat at national firm. Evelyn smiles, let's go home first. Of all the things Evelyn carried that winter, quiet resolve, patient memory, and a name no one expected, it was her grace that stayed behind long after the headlines faded. She taught us that kindness doesn't need to shout, and that true strength often wears the face of someone we underestimated. Like a porch light glowing through snowfall, a single act of quiet decency can guide us further than pride ever could. So if this story stirred something in you, perhaps let it settle into the small choices. A gentle word, a second glance, a bit of trust offered freely. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is simply the one who chooses to listen before anyone ever thought to ask.